My name is Mamokgethi Phakeng. I'm the newly appointed Vice-Chancellor, and this is my second inaugural lecture. The first one, I made many, many mistakes. So today we're trying to reduce the number of mistakes I make. On stage with me is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Loretta Ferris, and the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor David Waddle. And then we have Professor Vivian Bozalek, who will do the vote of thanks at the end. And I don't have names of other people on stage, but we're really delighted to have you there from the Faculty of Humanities. Okay. All right. There we go. So we're done with the protocols. If I didn't protocol you, I'll protocol you when I observe you. An important topic at UCT today is decolonizing education, something that this university supports and is seeking to institute. The call for decolonization reflects our need as South African educators, researchers, and students for a pedagogy and curriculum that reflects our own history, cultural background, languages, and experiences. We need to be acknowledged and respected for our own unique contribution to the academic project, the ways we express our excellence and professionalism as Africans. And tonight's presentation speaks to the need for early childhood education to instill the same sense of association and pride in the home culture of young learners. The introduction of the National Research Foundation funded study entitled Decolonizing Early Childhood Education, or Early Childhood Discourses, Critical Posthumanism in Higher Education Research Project, in which Professor Karin Murris is the lead researcher, says, after the demise of apartheid, South African higher education has been concerned with gender and class, but no attention has been paid as yet to age as a category of exclusion. In particular, child and childhood has not been included in post-colonial discourses about transformation of higher educational spaces and curriculum. Despite decades of sustained academic critique and contestation in early childhood research, current programs of study globally and the pedagogies promoted in their courses still assume the essentialized universal Western child. Now that I have stated the need to break with tradition, I need to explain that the inaugural lecture is itself a tradition in higher education, but one that does not rely on Western values. It celebrates our colleagues' appointment to full professorship and provides a platform to present the body of research that has been the focus of a rising career. It is also an important reflection of the support that the researcher receives from family and friends who may have only the barest understanding of what their loved ones has been getting so excited about. To those people who are here tonight in support of Professor Murris, I give a special welcome and the university's thanks for your support, because no one gets to this level on their own. There's always family behind them who enables them to do what they do with great passion. UCT has a strong tradition of cutting-edge research. It is not something any of us take for granted, because we know it is not just a job, it is our passion. It is what we do to help solve difficult questions and problems that can burden our society, our relationships with one another, and the world we live in. We have made this particular inaugural lecture on the post-human child, reconfiguring the human and educational relationality in all phases of education public, because we think you will appreciate this glimpse into how UCT research can help transform South Africa. There are different definitions of posthumanism, but one helpful summary is that the movement seeks to examine what is meant to be human in light of current cultural and historical context. I now hand over to Professor David Waddle, the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, to introduce our speaker for the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome.
Professor Karin Murris has followed a far from conventional path in rising to the professorship that we're celebrating this evening. She secured her first permanent full-time position in academe at the age of 50 as a senior lecturer in the School of Education at the University of the Witwatersrand in 2009. In 2012, she moved from WITS to UCT and became an associate professor in the School of Education. And in October 2016, she was promoted to full professor. Professor Murris was born in Amsterdam, but has spent much of her life outside Holland. For example, during her childhood, there were stints in Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, and France, but she attended Leiden University to study philosophy. Married and with 2 young children, she moved to the United Kingdom to complete a master's in philosophy in the evenings at Birkbeck College at the University of London. Undaunted by a rapidly expanding family, Karin took on a PhD at the University of Hull because she could work there on the intellectual topic that has defined her academic career, philosophy with children. For a decade before taking up her post at WITS, Karin built up a consultancy practice, working as a practical philosopher with highly diverse groups of people in various European countries. At the same time, she worked as a visiting professor of philosophy and applied ethics at the University of Wales for 4 years. Although now celebrating a decade in full-time academic employment, Karin remains committed to the space in between theory and practice, mostly inspired by the academic discipline of Western philosophy, but also by library science, which was her first degree. In her 3rd BSc year, she specialized in children's literature. Drawing on all these earlier educational and other experiences, she's become an internationally recognized scholar in the field of education, specializing in philosophy with children, childhood studies, children's literature, and philosophy of education. Between 2015 and 2017, she was president-elect of the International Council of Philosophical Inquiry with Children. Her current early years research and work as a teacher-educator is grounded in academic philosophy as her discipline, and simultaneously is committed to practical application in the local education system and to educational transformation. She's helped to conceptualize, organize, and embed philosophy with children in mainstream education in the United Kingdom, and leads similar developments in South Africa. She runs voluntary networks for teachers who are interested in philosophical inquiry with children and with the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood education at UCT. Central to her research are her activities as principal investigator of the Decolonizing Early Childhood Discourses, Critical Posthumanism in Higher Education, a research fund sponsored by the NRF here in South Africa. Her academic publications include 4 books and more than 50 peer-reviewed papers and book chapters. Her monograph, The Posthuman Child, Educational Transformation Through Philosophy with Picture Books, has received positive reviews and is attracting attention around the world. Her research has led to a range of invitations to collaborate in research projects, and in 2017, she was awarded the Atkins Visiting Professorship in Philosophy at the University of Queensland in Australia. So it is with great pleasure that I invite Professor Karin Murris to give her inaugural lecture with the title Posthuman Child, Reconfiguring the Human and Educational Relationality in All Phases of Education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wardle, Dean of the Humanities, for your introduction, and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Bakeng, and for hosting this event, also introducing me, and for Professor Ferris, and also for my wonderful colleagues, Roseanne Reynolds and Joanne Pearce. I also look very much forward to the vote of thanks from Professor Vivian Bozalek from University of the Western Cape. Moreover, I would like to thank the UCT community and the wider community, and of course the audience here, to come late on a day, to come here, to listen to us, and to present hopefully some interesting ideas for you. It's a real honor to be here. As Professor Wardle indicated, my journey has been a very unusual one. And I selected an image of inside the international terminal at Amsterdam Airport to express my geopolitical and disciplinary traveling, but also border crossing. What you can see in the background of this photo is the clock you saw earlier, but it isn't really in the background when you arrive from South Africa. It really strikes you if you pay attention. And that's really what a lot of my research, latest research, is about. In 2016, artist Maarten Baas created this clock at Amsterdam Airport in which a working man can be seen painting the time minute by minute, accurate time, real time. In his time performances, Maarten combines theatre, art, film, and design. This photo shows a miniature version of the clock at the Dutch National Museum in Amsterdam, what we both saw, Roseanne and I, when we were traveling to a research project in Denmark. It's very close to where I was born, in the Spinoza Clinic in the Spinozastraat in Amsterdam. Philosophy has been clearly my fate from birth. You can see how a father uses the art installation to teach his son how to tell the time, clock time. A human construction that treats time as determinate and singular, tuned to a succession of discrete moments, homogeneous, empty time, where each successive moment replaces the one before it. Of course, the father is doing a good job. This is what he has learned. As a responsible parent, you need to give your sons a head start to making adult knowledge their own. According to feminist philosopher and quantum physicist Karin Murris, clock time is the time of capitalism, colonialism, and militarism. Clock time is also the time of schooling and prepares children for a neoliberal, individually competitive workplace. It produces particular knowledges about education and what it means to be both educator and educated. But clock time is not universal. Some cultures express time spatially. As indigenous philosopher Deloria explains, once history as time is universalized and human beings are, so to speak, all put on the same clock, it is inevitable that in the big picture of human history, some peoples will be viewed as on time, ahead of time, or running late. It makes little difference that the clock hands rotate in circles, for they are thought of and acted on as if there were wheels moving down a single road called progress. Just need some water. Water will come back, actually. In my manifesto, an animated cartoon, I take the opportunity to stir up trouble in various philosophical ways, not by exploring what clock time means or stands for, but how it performs or works. I do this through a genealogy, it means a political reading of the present, of the ways in which concepts such as time, childhood, knowledge and education have been shaped, often subconsciously, and continue to be shaped by philosophical theories and educational practices. This will take around 16 minutes. It's actually 17 minutes. This was after I wrote it. Secondly, together with my two wonderful colleagues, Roseanne Reynolds and Joanne Pierce, we will give a flavor of our teaching here at UCT. We will be drawing on a published paper and also a book that our research project has just published, so you might want to move some of these books around. For more information about these, see the fact sheet on your table and other events, etc., that we organize. Our presentation will take around 20 minutes, and we will show the pedagogical implications of philosophical dust raised by the cartoon. We hope this offers an imaginary of what is possible when education shifts radically to embrace a relational ontology, thereby creating different epistemic and ethical relationships to time, space, and matter when teaching. We will thereby also put our own selves at stake as humans through pedagogical work that assumes a different educational relationality involving the non-human. Venturing off the beaten path, we will show how such an experimental decolonizing shift can be not imitated, but fostered and cultivated in higher education. We do this by taking the concept of family for a walk. Central in our presentation is our question, what constitutes a family? Here you can see a curious fantasy creature created by Patricia Piccinini and her team of artists. I saw it at an exhibition I visited last month in Brisbane, Australia. This extraordinary art installation expresses how this mother looks equally after her own kin and an oddkin, an almost human baby. Talking about family, very much entangled in my achievements as an academic are my wonderful friends, colleagues, students, and children I have had the privilege to live with and to work with. It's also thanks to my parents and their upbringing and nurturing of critical thinking and their encouragement to speak up when justice is at stake that I'm in a position to profess the topic of my lecture. And it's real sadness to me that my mother is not here. She lives in The Hague, and that my father died 5 years ago. Entangled also is the more than human. Water has exerted a significant pull in my decisions of where and what I do and think and how I feel. In water, also 4 of our children were born at home. Our 5 children, 2 grandchildren, cats, dogs, rabbits, snake, Mississippi map turtles, cows, sheep, bluestone, slate, mountains, and so forth, have been a wonderful inspiration for my current work as teacher-educator. Here in the birth card, designed by our 4th child, who's sitting in the first row, we celebrate the birth of our youngest in a birthing pool, who's also sitting in the first row. It was when our youngest was about 1 year old that my husband and I more or less swapped roles in caring full-time for our large family. Thanks to his generosity, I stand here now in front of you. Without his modesty, care, humor, and infinite support, I simply couldn't have done it. I therefore dedicate this manifesto to him, Simon, my lifelong friend. The medium of my manifesto, in case you didn't know, is an urgent call for political action. It is an animated cartoon created by a South African editorial cartoonist, Brandon Reynolds, who's here, who's also in the audience with us today. Thank you, Brandon, for your incredible gift to visualize my very abstract philosophical and pedagogical ideas. The result you can judge for yourself. The entanglement of the visual and the voiceover has created a powerful ecosystem. And if you'd like to see it again sometime, it will be available on our project's website, but also on YouTube, perhaps I think next week. So the cartoon is coming now. I don't know who's going to do that one. But Brandon, you might want to stand up, and I just would like to give you a big applause. A manifesto, Posthuman Child, Decolonizing Childhood through Reconfiguring the Human.
Key to understanding the notion of posthuman child as a lever to decolonize education is the pervasive adult conception of temporality in education that takes development and progress as inevitable. Time is like an arrow pointing towards a future that is more progressed, further developed, and extinguishing childhood. There is no time to be intensely immersed in an event. This holds both for nations as it does for children. In education, we talk about school readiness and developmental appropriate practice, a still dominant developmental orientation informed in particular by Piaget's theory of cognitive development that claims to be both natural and universal, but is in fact normative. It assumes that humans develop individually and innately, according to general laws, through clearly identifiable irreversible stages until the child is capable of abstract, rational, logical thought and is mature psychologically, socially, and biologically. The norm of this linear maturation process is an adult who is white, middle class, male, heterosexual, and able-bodied, the root cause of structural exploitation, dehumanization of women, sexualized, racialized, and naturalized others, and asymmetrical violence. For post-structuralists and critical post-humanists, the human is clearly a political category, although interestingly and of concern, age is not included yet as a category of discrimination. Even the children's rights discourse is developmental. The United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child assumes that the end goal of childhood is the formation of an adult citizen competent and capable of living individually and contributing productively to a Western-style liberal democracy. The adult, with a capital I, is the accepted valued norm, and child, therefore, as a lesser, still maturing adult in the making. Child as small I, childish, less competent, and less useful. For example, Article 12 of the Convention states that children do not have full autonomy and that their ability to form and express their opinion develops with age and maturity. Developmentalism is a recapitulation theory. Child's intellectual development is compared with, recapitulates, the development of the species, with the child as nature as the origin of the species. See, for example, Darwin, from savage to civilized. This process of racial differentiation underlies our modern understanding of child and is used as justification to treat children as intellectual and emotional primitives. According to the recapitulation theory, children's conceptual understanding evolves from concrete to abstract and simple to more complex, and it is assumed that full understanding across phases in the life cycle is not possible, because the differences between child, savage, and the adult are not just differences of degree, but of kind. Child is an ontological other. Child is the marginalized property of the adult, economically disenfranchised with no right to work or own property, a description that is also applied to indigenous peoples. Moreover, as for example Cecil Rhodes put it darkly, the native is to be treated as a child, which for Ashish Nandi does not only express racism, but an ideology that sees childhood as the logic of colonialism. As ontological other, it is assumed the child lacks the capacity for choice and moral agency. Like the insane and the criminal, child is confined in institutions, suffers from mental humiliation, harsh punishments, constant surveillance, and a complete lack of academic freedom. Since orality was replaced by literacy in the printed word, child has become an outsider to adult culture. Children are segregated as cultural outsiders in schools, as well as age segregated within schools. The conception of time that underpins developmentalism is chronological time, an uninterrupted flow of nows that can be measured, chronos. Time and childhood are intrinsically entangled concepts and logically connected in the lived experience of educational institutions with their clock-bound work. Childhood tends to be viewed instrumentally, mere preparation for adulthood, and ignores all the things children are indeed good at, perhaps even better at than adults. For example, expressing themselves artistically, asking philosophical questions, or learning a new language. Developmental theories assume a deficit model of childhood, whose plausibility rests on comparing children with adults primarily in terms of adult knowledge. Moreover, child is not only segregated and separated from adults spatially, for example, forced into indoor classrooms in order to learn, and into engineered recreational areas to play and socialize, child is also separated from her own selves. Cut into emotional, cognitive, and physical parts, children develop each part according to different speeds. To think about the self in this way, whether child or adult, are the still dominant Western dichotomous philosophies, in particular Plato and Descartes, and religions that assume an ontological split between the two radically different substances, mind and body, a deep dualism that characterizes modernity. It assumes that universal, timeless knowledge of the outside world is obtained from the inside of the mature, knowing adult subject, as conscious, self-aware, self-contained, independent, rational, mature, and universal. This ontology regards human as what Donna Haraway calls autopoietic systems, organizationally closed with self-produced binaries, predictable autonomous units that are centrally controlled, for example through a human will or intellect. To put it graphically, since modernity, academic work in schools as well as universities is carried out by disembodied brains on sticks. Knowledge is transmitted through language, through words, many words that represent the world out there. Learning is about the world and is seldom experiential, involving the body and the senses. The routine use of worksheets is a good example of this. Touching, smelling, or movement are rarely regarded as means to acquire, communicate, or assess knowledge that matters. In many ways, education involves the subordination and discrimination of humans who are not regarded as fully human yet. They are wild, uncivilized savages who are of nature and need culture to become civilized. Scientifically objectified as units of study, children are subjected to a sea of normative classifications and semi-medical diagnoses when they depart from the norm. Think of ADHD, autistic, bipolar, etc. The terms colonizer and colonized take on a double meaning in the context of childhood. Whether childhood is constructed as a phase in the life cycle of a human life or a species or a nation, chronological improvement to independence, autonomy, and rationality is assumed, that is, the logic and temporality of colonialism. Therefore, decolonizing childhood requires a troubling of the experience of time in education, but also truth, hence the / in decolonizing, as the latter positions children as knowledge consumers and unequal epistemic adult-child relationships. Western humanist ontology and religion have produced certain figurations of childhood with a nature-culture dichotomy as its structuring mechanism. For clarity's sake, I've created a table expressing how the binary and its entanglement with modern schooling works for adults to have power over children, how it includes and excludes. The figurations, of course, overlap. I've published this table before, but I've made an important change to it since. Although of course simplified, it should help clarify why embodied experiences in the body, read nature, have been rendered inferior to the mind, read culture, in schooling. The way we build relationships with children and are listening as adults to children has been shaped by Western ontologies and educational theories. The figuration of the developing child draws especially on ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. Like an acorn, child is unfinished and incomplete by nature and therefore requires maturation and guidance from adults. The figuration of the ignorant child lacks rationality and intelligence. As empty vessel waiting to be filled, child is either ignorant because she needs experiences, see for example Aristotle and Locke, and therefore needs training, or child lacks reason, see for example Plato, and therefore needs instruction. The figuration of the Eva child's major influence is Protestantism. Child is born essentially sinful and can therefore not be trusted. The task of culture is control and discipline, as in the current meaning of disciple. The aim is to surrender one's authority to someone else, a truth outside oneself. The preferred method of teaching is inculcation. In Latin, means force upon or stamp in. Importantly, teaching is a drawing in to established systems of thought. The key influence for the figuration of the innocent child has been philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who argued that childhood as a special time of vulnerability needs to unfold naturally with as little intervention as possible. Child is positioned as lacking responsibility and requires protection. Innocence is a white privilege and is systematically denied to brown bodies. The teacher is positioned as a facilitator of learning. The figuration of the egocentric child draws in particular on psychologist Jean Piaget. Child lacks social norms and cultural values, cannot empathize or decenter in the imagination, and requires socialization by elders and inculcation. The figuration of the fragile child rests upon psychomedical scientific models. Children are seen as vulnerable, lacking resilience, and in need of protection and medication for normalization. The fragile child lacks resilience by nature and needs culture to diagnose, protect, possibly medicate, and teachers to remediate. All figurations of child in the table assume childhood as an inferior stage in human development, with a mature, developed, rational, autonomous adult self as the normative ideal. They shape teaching, research, curriculum construction, educational policies, and often sentimentalized adult imaginaries. They frame debates about the proportional influence of nature, read biology, and nurture, read socialization, on children's development, zigzagging between the two poles, often expressed in percentages. However, there are severe problems with the cognitive framing of these figurations. For decades in the sociology of childhood, post-structuralists and postmodernists have questioned the dichotomy between nature and culture because it ignores the role of political, socio-economic power relations and the politics of cultural, racial, and gendered identities in nature realist accounts of childhood. Shifting research to matters of Foucauldian discourse and language, these scholars argue that this child, or childhood, does not exist because there are many children and many childhoods. Through their scholarship, the idea started to take root mainly in academia that childhood, like race, is a social construct, called social constructionism. I express this in my book, The Posthuman Child as I, small i's. Critical posthumanism takes their critique a radical ontological step further and involves an unsettling of voice and identity as something humans have, with agency as something outside the acting human body. Posthumanism invites us to reconfigure who and what the I is, as well as its relationship to the world, more akin to some indigenous knowledge systems and young children's epistemologies and form of life. Humans are part of nature culture and cannot take a transcendental detached point of view, a view from nowhere in particular. The material discursive entanglements of agencies and processes are already at work when classifying children. Decolonization is beyond identity and individualized agency, neither in charge of nature nor of culture. Disrupting the nature-culture dichotomy cannot come from an adult merely deconstructing childhood as social construct, but requires an ontological decentering of the human. The human of whatever age is not just social, but also material, as we have seen what Haraway calls an unbounded, sympoetic system. Complex, dynamic, responsive, situated, and historical. The figuration of posthuman child as I, printed in grey instead of black to express the subject as unbounded, sympoetic system, is not a doing away with or a denial that there are individual children who exist, but reconfigures the human as always already inhuman and more than human company, is inhuman in fact, already untangled with what, for example, happens on Mars, and how a reading scheme measures reading abilities, and the desire, for example, becoming a doctor, and the phone she's accessing WhatsApp messages with, and the chair she's sitting on, and her classroom in Vrijgrond with an ant crawling on the floor, and ad infinitum. Hence, it is impossible to trace all entanglements that are part of what makes a child act the way she does. Resisting erasures between past and futures, a posthuman child does not exist as a distinct entity prior to her interactions, but emerges through interactions in between the material and the discursive that constitute the subject and her agency. Cells, atoms, wind, fibers, dust, metal, skin, ant legs, soil, paper, government, concept, policies, language, touch, atmosphere, and so forth. Feminist philosopher Karin Murris's major contribution to the social sciences and the humanities has been to show how quantum physics evidences that nature and culture are always diffracted through one another as a matter of fact. Unlike the clock time of progress and developmentalism, threaded through each person is or rather their situated childhood as well as their future and the present. Times are bleeding through one another. Present, past, and future permeate one another as events, combinations of different times. Time is made through processes as opposed to the Newtonian idea of empty, universal time as a container for events and time as an arrow. Reconfiguring the human as nature culture and regarding child and adult as symbiotic systems inhabiting multiple temporalities and rendering each other capable is salient and urgent for intergenerational justice to come.
Okay, so in our presentation, we give an imaginary of what a posthuman educator might be like. You've just seen, if she's neither a guide, nor an instructor, nor a trainer, nor a discipliner, nor a facilitator, nor a socializer, nor a protector, nor a diagnoser, nor a medicator, then what kind of teacher is she? In the cartoon, the subject is reconfigured as a symbiotic system. For Donna Haraway, sympoiesis is a simple word. It means making with. Nothing makes itself. Nothing is really autopoietic or self-organizing. Earthlings are never alone. That is the radical implication of sympoiesis. Sympoiesis is a word proper to complex, dynamic, responsive, situated historical systems. It's a word for worlding with, in company. We show how this works by dismantling the boundaries between adult-child, nature-culture, and past-present future, and we put into practice decolonizing pedagogies in the university classroom across three courses by slowing down time. Oh, sorry, let me move some slides across. So here is an example of how one of our students expressed the different figurations of child and the shift in subjectivity provoked by a troubling of the nature-culture binary. Nadia Woodward created the following images as part of her final installation, the assessment for the course Childhood Studies. So I quote from her final installation, her final essay. Child as small I is the view of child through the lens of study and observation. The developing child, the child becoming an adult, the child who is held up against benchmarks, standards, norms, a child understood through the lens and study of cognitive psychology. Child as big I, large I, is the child who is valued and considered a citizen with rights, a child seen as capable and who has a voice, the child who is in need of protection, the Western indoor child. Meet I. Child as I is a child as a product of his/her surroundings, the child in context, the social political context within which we find child, which determines our view of such child. And here you see Nadia. Child is I, the posthuman child, the child who is not in the world or a part of the world, but is with the world. The child interwoven with and in the social, the political, the non-human and the material, where the child is not at the center, nor is adult or any human, but rather is all connected and enmeshed in a complex system. And now I'll hand you over to Joanna.
Good evening. So our presentation includes 3 lecturers' courses in teacher education at UCT. Karin developed a program for foundation phase teacher education, which means 5 to 9-year-olds. And she teaches one course called Childhood Studies. Reynolds teaches one course called Special Studies and is a PhD student and will be joining the School of Education as a foundation phase lecturer in 2019. I teach life skills and am awaiting the feedback of my dissertation, which focused on Reggio Emilia approach to refiguring early childhood education in South Africa. So how do we prepare student teachers for posthuman pedagogical practices as outlined in the cartoon? That posits a knowing subject that has little to do with age, but more to do with a flux or intensity of the unbounded body that continuously affects and is affected by and emerges relationally through interaction and diffraction. How can educators be supported to foreground ontological relationality and posthuman subjectivity in their own practices at school? In our presentation, we experiment with a different way of working with the clock and with time. Central in our teaching is how we teach across 3 university courses, paying attention to the changed relationality between human and more than human. In particular, we focus on discriminatory animal-human and child-adult relations in segregated and enclosed spaces for children, adults, animals, and plants that are regulated through various inside-outside binaries that include and exclude, keeping the other at a distance. Schools, zoos, aquariums, botanical gardens, etc. are colonizing material discursive spaces. These spaces assume non-egalitarian power relations between adult and child, human and animals, and human and plants. We show how we stirred up trouble in and outside our university classroom, but also how we stayed with the trouble that is to learn and to be truly present in colonized spaces, according to Haraway. We show mainly through visual images how one picture book can be used as a provocation for an emergent curriculum in teacher education. Key to our decolonizing work is the use of Reggio Emilia and philosophy for children as an interactive, intergenerational pedagogy. It involves wondering about the established meanings of concepts through philosophical questioning and to provoke extended projects by taking the concepts that emerge in philosophical inquiries into other interventions through pedagogical documentation. The famous metaphor of the 100 languages is a poem written by Loris Malaguzzi, the founder of the Reggio Emilia approach to education, which is a powerful critique of the privileging of the dominant 2 languages in higher education, reading and writing. What is not valued as a means to construct knowledge of visual arts, physical movement, video, digital cameras, augmented realities, and computers. The pedagogical documentation of our teaching contains many images of the students' work, of them working together, sometimes on their own, often in small groups, and regularly as a whole class. The constant reworking of the documentation is a form of listening, through annotated visualization of selected events in class, bringing energies and forces to the project work that open up new possibilities. What is documented and how it is read and the infinite possibilities created in this way. The conceptual focus seemed the key to such a dynamic, evolving curriculum, provoking new thoughts, emotions, sensations, and perceptions. The documentation brings into the world a material discursive expression of students' learning and their interaction with more than human things, thought, affect, concepts, and environment. In particular, we focused at the end of last year on the concepts family and family tree, generated partly by the students themselves, resisting the temptation to define these concepts and treat them as representations of an independently existing reality out there. We worked with them transversely. That is, they cut across the binaries of the objective nature and subjective culture. They not only stirred our minds, but also struck our bodies. They constrain as well as express desire and freedom. We had a hunch, an inkling, that the philosophical concepts that might fly from Julia Donaldson and Alex Scheffler's The Stick Man could be particularly useful for us, for the concepts family, belonging, and loneliness, would be helpful for our students to think about subjectivity. Posthuman pedagogies assume nomadic subjects, according to Braidotti, selves who are not only epistemologically homeless, but also discontinuously becoming, according to Berard. They are corporeal entities that have spatio-temporal force, that is, nomadic subjects are embedded and embodied, and therefore immanent and dynamic. The Stick Man is well stocked in South African bookshops. It is an illustrated poem about the stick man, the toy, the Gruffalo's child in a picture book by the same name and the same authors, who gets involved in a terrifying journey when he takes a jog away from his family tree, inhabited by the stick lady love and their stick children 3. Towards the end of the story, he's finally saved and employed by Santa to deliver toys on Christmas Eve. The last delivery of Christmas presents happens to be the family tree when he is reunited for Christmas with his overjoyed family. And I'll read you a little bit. I'm not a stick. Why can't you see? I'm stick man. I'm stick man. I'm stick man. That's me. And I want to go home to the family tree. The students observed that the story features unfamiliar environments. For example, snow, white humans, and a nuclear stickman family with the male character in, as usual, active, adventurous role. Despite that, the concepts the students raised and questioned the story showed that reading text is not about representing characters you necessarily recognize. Think, for example, about the appeal stories with monsters have or aliens, but whether a text raises abstract concepts one can connect with, such as family, loneliness, belonging, alive, and dead. Rather than working in a linear way, pre-planned by us lecturers, we slowed down the process and kept returning to ideas previously expressed and questions asked. We worked rhizomatically, and in the tree, you'll see visuals only of very few of our activities, all entangled with one another, deepening our thinking and getting more and more affected by the concept family. So how does this fit into the curriculum, whether CAPS or NCF? As you'll see in this slide, at the bottom is a conventional worksheet that is used in a South African classroom in relation to stickman or family. And if you have a look at the other images, you'll see how together we used other ways of interacting with these concepts. So you'll see, for example, a photograph of a bed made of Play-Doh. And Karin says to one of the students, could you show the page in the book that inspired the Play-Doh and also your question? Could you talk a bit more about the image itself? Could you say a bit more about the bed? Well, just that the bed itself is made of sticks, says the student. He has got this whole entire journey to get back to his family. And his family is without him on Christmas Eve, or whatever. It is quite hypocritical. One of the students continued and referred to cannibalism.
I keep on looking, where's Malakaya? Malakaya, where are you? You're at the back. Can't see. Oh, there you are. Being with wood in silence. When we returned to the story of the stickman, and the students were invited to stay with a wooden log for a while. Being with it, making contact. Malakaya bounced his log up and down. Some others wrapped theirs in fabric. We also did a similar activity with paper. We tend to think about paper and wood in schools as instruments and tools only for human use. We switched languages again and used the story as a starting point for a philosophical inquiry. Here are the questions the students asked. And we kept using these again and again to start off and connect with other activities. Why do we value human needs more over non-human needs? Do material objects have a belonging to go back to something from which they came? Is that amazing, those questions coming from a children's book? Can the inanimate have a family and emotional desires? Who speaks out for the voiceless? And deliberately 2 questions, and that question also was taken to the District 6 Museum, wasn't it? Why do humans and animals feel superior to other objects or things in nature? Why is one stick a stickman and the others not? Why is it that only when we personify non-human things do we care or empathize or place importance on them? So in this pedagogy, we use those stories. And it's then the students, or in class, the children who ask the questions, and then they are starting points for philosophical inquiries. When interacting as lecturers with the pedagogical documentation on the Google Doc, we notice that the concepts, I'll have to get it going again, wait a minute. We noticed that the concepts family, belonging, and alive dad kept returning in our work with the students. We asked them to interact with the embedded augmented reality of the iSolar system book by downloading the app in the book. Through this downloaded app on their smartphone, the planets come alive, circling around each other. Then a conceptual connection was made with the stickman's belonging to his family tree, and we stirred up trouble by asking, is the Earth part of a family? After our plenary inquiry, one student said, the idea of the universe makes me feel sick. Well, that's interesting, one of us asked. So how will you teach a topic that makes you feel sick? After returning to the documentation of the 3 courses, we decided on a particular focus for a planned outing to the aquarium in special studies.
Good evening. At the Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town, there is a teaching room. So our students experience the lesson that children usually get when they are visiting. This is an example of how Karin and my observations and the students' responses to each other in different colors move the inquiry along. So it's not the point to necessarily read everything, but just to think about under a microscope, you see so much movement. This is a student talking. Later on, someone told us in the aquarium, a sea urchin can also be touched, but doesn't respond anymore because it has been touched too often. Here is some more of our documentation making visible about how we observe the students' learning. The teacher in the aquarium classroom is adamant that it's okay to touch the animals because it is educational. teach in the aquarium. It's good to touch them when learning. Tristan wonders out loud whether that is okay, really. The students all have different responses to that. Some are not sure it is right. Others are scared, and Megan has a no-nonsense attitude. She's not sure she's allowed to pick up the sea urchin, but does it anyway. On arrival at the Two Oceans Aquarium, the students were struck by a poster welcoming visitors with a hermit crab saying, "Join the family." By implication, we were not already members of this family. Joining this family would involve a hefty financial transaction, and the students were troubled by how expensive it was to visit the aquarium, which meant it excluded groups of people who could not afford to pay the entrance fees, which in turn would then impact on who could be part of the family. A student asks, is the aquarium a private school? This is a visiting school. This is an educational intervention set up at the aquarium. Notice the pristine tank, no destruction. Humans are good. The children are sitting, being quiet, being asked to be quiet. Hands are raised. The arrows show hands being raised. The arrow in the far left is actually a child pointing towards the tank. The presenter is reciting from a script. Knowledge and knowing is located in the adult human with a mic, positioning child as small I. Education here presupposes subjectivity as an autopoietic system with self-produced binaries. Hathaway would suggest we are positioning child as small I with a developmental orientation and without surprises or opportunities for disembodied learning. Again, this if you look at the stingray, Angie was asking, she never thought, where do fish come from? I only think about humans. Karin asked, to what extent is belonging central to deciding what is and isn't family? And is that just for the human or also the non-human? The tanks in the aquarium are meant to be homes for the various sea creatures. Their material discursive presence raised questions that stirred up trouble for our student teachers. The tanks are designed for particular groupings of fish, so the aquarium ended up being a family with tanks as rooms with no interleading doors, as all the tanks were separate. So which family, therefore, was to be joined? After all, only humans could voluntarily join the family. The fish and sharks had no say in whether they wanted to be there or not. One student expressed a concern that the fish in the tanks had been removed from their larger families in the ocean in order to be available to be looked at by the visitors to the aquarium. Fish in tanks are also part of a family. Never thought of that before. Is family then a human concept? And how does the concept work to include and exclude? How does it prevent making kin with other animals and the more than human? One way to respond to Hathaway's passionate plea to cultivate responsibility was to move our primary place of learning and teaching to the outdoors. This is an image of some planning for another field trip, this time to Arden Gardens, a small park not far from UCT, a public space, so it doesn't cost anything to visit. Here, my planning of activities for the day is inspired by our collaborative work from our pedagogical documentation on the Google Doc. We are not projecting forward in a linear way, but rather a troubling time. Melikaya Asu is here tonight. Who belongs to what and whom? A group called the Watchers, and this was at UCT, they'd been working through some philosophical inquiries. They were asking, what does it mean to be isolated or displaced from what you know? And as you can imagine, that also connected to another trip to the District 6 Museum mentioned earlier. What does it mean to belong to a family? After returning to our documentation of the aquarium, we decided to stir up more trouble with the concept family tree when visiting the gardens. The choice of that particular botanical garden was deliberate. It is the home of alien trees and plants, and their reason for being in the park is because they were exotic to South Africa. These trees do not naturally belong there. They are not part of the flora indigenous to South Africa and were planted by white settlers, the Arden family. Here the students willingly take up the invitation of the Moraton fig trees, huge roots on top of the soil, which created contained spaces, and in small groups read the picture books we had brought along to each other. These picture books all featured trees and forests. Our philosophical teaching disrupted the power-producing Western humanist binaries, the assumptions that picture books are only for children, that reading in educational institutions happens inside buildings, that a human family is more important than fish or tree families, and that these families cannot exist beyond human-created binaries. Our collaborative work with the students kept raising questions about what it means to belong to a family. Angie is leaning against and being supported by the giant roots, and she reads to fellow student Sukile. The picture book is Anthony Brown's Hansel and Gretel, written in 2008. Without being able to articulate it fully in words, we are struck by the material discursive entanglement, making kin, a changed relationality between human and more than human, transversing gender, race, class, and age, soil, paper, blanket, hands, concentration, texture, stripes, blue, bark, bedtime, fairy tale. Thank you. Yeah.
We end with powerful questions posed by feminist philosopher Donna Haraway. Questions that will continue to stir up trouble in our teacher education program. Making kin troubles important matters like to whom one is actually responsible, who lives and who dies, and how in this kinship rather than that one. What shape is this kinship? Where and whom do its lines connect and disconnect, and so what? What must be cut and what must be tied if multi-species flourishing on Earth, including human and other than human beings in kinship, are to have a chance? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to do this vote of thanks to Karin Murris. I'm sure you will have realized by now, those of you who don't know Karin well, that she's quite a remarkable person. Those of you who do know her well are probably still surprised by her all the time. To give a bit of background to Karin as I know her, I met Karin in an unusual way. Karin is unusual. I've never been approached by someone who does not know me at all, never met me, who's organizing a conference, who's read a paper of mine published in an educational journal, and takes the trouble to make contact with me through email, suggesting that I present a paper at this conference that Karin was organizing, the International Council of Philosophical Inquiry with Children conference held 30th of August to 2nd of September 2013. I knew nothing about philosophy with children, but Karin was encouraging that my paper would have something to offer and was welcoming and hospitable at the conference. I think that the international delegates at the conference had a wonderful reception at this very well-run conference. What astounded me was that I learned that Karin had basically organized this conference single-handedly with some help from family members and colleagues. This is another quality of Karin's that I found quite astounding, her energy and her ability just to get down and do things without any procrastinating. She has an astonishing capacity for hard work and for making what she does seem effortless. I mean this both practically and intellectually. And as Karin herself would posit, we should move beyond the binaries of knowing, doing. But Karin is not operating as a bounded, rational, and discrete individual. She comes into being through relationships. These include her family members who have provided an ethic of care before, during, and beyond her academic career, as she has for them. I'm reminded of the UKZN student who, in a graduation ceremony in April this year, honored his great-grandmother by bringing her onto stage, putting the gown on her and being capped together with her. Those of you who haven't watched this video, I'm not going to show it because I don't have time now, should do so. It's very moving. Now, we can't bring her family members down here to honor them, but we can acknowledge their contribution to this full professorship, of which Karin herself is fully cognizant, as we've heard. It's not just the family members who've been part of this journey and process of learning in academia. It is also Karin's friends, colleagues, and students husbands, I might add. A prominent influence and someone that Karin has thought with through talking and writing and continues to think with is Joanne Haynes. Karin and her have written a great deal together, including chapters, articles, and 2 manuscripts, one co-written and the other co-edited. Another significant influence in Karin's intellectual life has been the South American philosopher Walter Cohan. In October 2014, when Karin and I were both presenting papers at the UCT Philosophy Department's Social Equality Conference, where Miranda Fricker, Charles Mills, and others spoke, we decided to form a reading group. This group, I think, was very influential in both of our lives and in the lives of those with whom we were interacting. We met every week and have been through a great number of texts. We started with secondary texts written about theorists and philosophers like Spinoza, who Karin mentioned in her talk, Deleuze and Guattari, Karen Berard, Rosie Braidotti, Donna Haraway, Vincent Desprez, Isabel Stengers, and others, and then moved on to the primary sources. We've read some of these texts twice or sometimes 3 times. And from the outset, we also involved people in face-to-face 90-minute sessions, as well as online, for those who weren't able to geographically attend in dispersed contexts, as Karin would refer to them, the people in the machine. Karin said that being part of the reading group inspired her to write the manuscript, The Posthuman Child, which we've heard has been used in many different audiences in different parts of the world. We've also heard that she successfully applied for an NRF competitive rated researchers grant in 2015, and through this has been able to involve a number of eminent academics in this project, some of whom have visited Cape Town, such as Afrika Taylor, Karen Berard, and Figuration Malo, who were able to interact also with Karin's postgraduate students and provide seminars also for larger audiences. She also met a number of other scholars at international conferences that she subsequently worked with in her project. And through her project, she's co-presented with her postgraduate students at local and international conferences and has involved them in co-presenting with her in other forums, as you've seen here in this inaugural presentation. She's also been involved in co-writing chapters, which you'll see have been passed around, and articles with her postgraduate students. We've heard that Karin is conscious of moving beyond the nature-culture binaries in both her teaching and her research. As far as I'm concerned, she's one of the most creative teachers in higher education whose classes I've attended. And she uses her prior knowledges of the Reggio Emilia inspirational pedagogy and philosophy with children, which she's now diffracted through posthumanism and feminist new materialism. Where to from here? I surmise that Karin's boundless energy and enthusiasm will continue to infect others and to produce further interesting events and inventive experimentations. Ideas to which Karin herself subscribes are Berard's notions of space-time mattering, that, and I quote, "there is no fixed dividing line between self and other, past and present and future, here and now, cause and effect, and that what we take to be the past and what we take to be the present and the future are entangled with each other. What exists are interactive entanglements. Karin's past entanglements, here and there, now and then, are always already an entangled part of the future. In the near future is a colloquium conference entitled Pedagogies on a Damaged Planet, to be followed by a 2-day workshop on Gilles Deleuze's Difference and Repetition by Chantal Gray van Heerden, who's part of Karin's project on decolonizing childhood discourses. I have no doubt that Karin will continue flourishing in her becoming academic through her organization of events, growing projects, and interacting with diverse contexts and phenomena.
Karin, congratulations on your professorate. It was an amazing lecture, not just what you presented, but how you presented it, which is not only different, but shows how what Professor Bozalek spoke about, the relationships and how you draw them in the work that you do. But of course, it's not just relationships in this case, it's the people you work with, your students. And so what you are becoming, we can see also them becoming that which we desire all us postgraduate students to be. So congratulations. And on behalf of Senate and Council, congratulations on the professorship, and we really feel blessed to have your caliber in our midst. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating him. Congratulations to you too. As you can see, you were not on the script. You were part of Karin, and I didn't welcome you properly, but thank you very much for your input into the lecture. It was absolutely amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, join us for refreshments outside, and congratulations to Karin. Thank you very much for coming.